What is Russia thinking about with Ukraine? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. So Russian troops continue to mass along the Ukraine border, and this comes after the conversation between President Joe Biden and Russia's Vladimir Putin. Here to talk about this is David Tafuri. He was a former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor. He also worked at the State Department. David, good for you to join us. What do you make of what Vladimir Putin is up to?
Well, Putin gave a long press conference today from Moscow. It was about 4 hours, and a lot of the discussion was about Ukraine and what he's doing with respect to Ukraine's eastern border and his complaints about the US and about NATO. It's very clear that he's making it look like he might do a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It's not entirely clear if he really means to do that or he's just using that threat in order to coerce some compromises from the US and from NATO. He has over 100,000 troops on the border with eastern Ukraine, but he's had troops and influence in eastern Ukraine for a long time now, since 2014. So it's already a low-grade war. The question is, in 2022, is it going to become a high-grade war with a lot of violence, with more Russian troops in Ukraine, and with his intention to be to occupy Ukraine? It's not entirely clear, and it depends a lot on what the US and NATO response will be.
One of the responses so far has been Joe Biden saying the United States is not going to make any sort of clear commitment on behalf of NATO not to expand into the east, which is what Vladimir Putin wants. He wants NATO to flat out say, look, you're not going to expand, you're not going to include Ukraine as part of the NATO membership. With the Biden administration saying, no, we can't go there, what is Putin's next move? I mean, is it just sort of continuing to add troops as he's been doing? Does this increase the chances for war?
Well, I think that Biden made the right decision to make it very clear that we are not going to be blackmailed into taking a policy position that is not our policy position. It isn't really not in the interest of NATO to make a commitment like that to Russia, especially under the gun. I don't know what Russia will do next. Putin talked a lot today about how he wants commitments like that from the US. He's also very worried about the US putting more military installations near the border with Russia, as it has some operations and NATO-led operations in Romania and Poland, and he wants that not to be in Ukraine. But it's also notable that the US has provided about $2.5 billion in defensive military aid to Ukraine since 2014, and Biden and the Secretary of Defense have made clear that is going to continue. And in fact, it's going to ramp up, especially if Russia does take more provocative measures towards Ukraine. So all of this is a mystery as to what's going to happen. It depends a lot on ongoing discussions between the US and Russia. And the US and US officials made clear today that they want to continue those discussions, but it's not clear what they're willing to give Putin and whether it goes far enough to cause him to reduce the troop presence he has on the border of Ukraine right now.
Let's suppose, just for argument's sake, and again, no guarantee this would happen, but let's just suppose that Vladimir Putin is tired of the discussions, decides that they're not going anywhere, and go ahead and just decide to go ahead and put several thousand troops into Ukraine, maybe all 100,000, maybe full-scale invasion. What should the US plan be at that point?
Well, first of all, that is a serious provocation toward the US and towards NATO, and most importantly to international law and to the UN. Ukraine is a sovereign country, and all of the world should be defending Ukraine's sovereignty. And notably, President Biden and the Secretary of Defense have said that they will help Ukraine defend its sovereignty. But President Biden has also said that he's not going to put US troops in Ukraine. So it's not entirely clear how far we will go. Certainly, we're going to have to step up our military support for Ukraine, and certainly we're going to have to step up sanctions, and we're going to have to do everything we can in partnership with our European partners to try to coerce Russia and Putin to back off. But it is really a high stakes game.
And for all of the fears, therefore, that a lot of Americans have about the United States being drawn into a direct combat war with the Russians, it sounds like you're saying, well, even if Russia does go ahead and take that step of invading Ukraine, and of course they've already taken Crimea, they've already had the border skirmishes in eastern Ukraine, that the United States would likely just provide more military weapons and equipment to the Ukrainian soldiers that are fighting, and of course, ratchet up some incredible sanctions.
I think that's probably right. I'm not sure President Biden should have said he won't put U.S. troops in Ukraine, even if that is the U.S. policy, and that might be a good U.S. policy and probably reflects what the American people want. But we didn't necessarily need to tell Russia that in advance. But he's said that. So I imagine he's going to stick to that. He's not going to put U.S. troops in harm's way. But I expect the Biden administration will do everything else they can short of putting U.S. troops there, which includes stepping up military support and sanctions and cooperative measures and efforts through the UN, although those would likely be stymied by Russia since it's a member of the Security Council and can veto anything in the UN. But we would do all of those things and others, especially putting financial pressure on Russia to back off. But we don't know what will happen, whether that's going to work. Putin, he's a tough customer. He comes from a KGB background. He understands the intelligence measures. He understands how to undermine a country like Ukraine and undermine its democracy, which he's been doing for many years. And he seems intent upon continuing to do that.
He also seems to have a history of sometimes rattling cages or messing with Ukraine at a time when he's facing some domestic pressures or domestic challenges. Do you see anything happening in Russia right now domestically for Vladimir Putin that would encourage him to try to draw everybody's attention away from what's happening in Moscow and put the attention on Ukraine?
Sure, the economy is not doing well in Russia. It's been hit hard also by COVID. So he likes to distract his population, as you mentioned, from the internal problems inside Russia by saber rattling and by focusing people on the ways in which he is promoting Russia's prominence abroad and Russian influence in other countries. And so I think that's part of why he does this. But the main reason Putin does this, let's be honest, is because Putin cares only about staying in power. So everything is about how does he stay in power? He surrounds himself with oligarchs who are loyal to him. He ensures that they get the proceeds of the Russian largesse, and that's why they're billionaires, and they continue to be billionaires as long as they're loyal to him and they support him and they do his dirty work. And so he runs a giant kleptocracy, and he wants to extend that kleptocracy to other countries around Russia, like Ukraine. And the reason he wants to do it is for self-preservation. He wants to be a forever dictator. He wants to remain the head of the Russian government, the head of the Russian state until the end of his life.
Are there any natural resources or things in Ukraine that Russia doesn't already have access to that might help him with that kleptocracy, with that oligarchy that he continues to build?
Sure. I mean, he doesn't have the same level of influence in Ukraine that he had before the revolution in Ukraine in 2014. He previously had Yanukovych as the leader of Ukraine, who became basically a puppet of Putin and Russia, and who was pushed out for that reason. Ukraine is very nationalist. Most Ukrainians are very proud to be an independent, sovereign country. They resent what Russia has been doing since 2014. So he doesn't have the level of control that he would like, but he certainly has some oligarchs in Ukraine who he is allied with, who do business with Russia, who have some influence in Ukraine. And he would like to extend that and get more control over both the industry in Ukraine and over the government in Ukraine. He's not been successful lately, but part of the pressure he's putting on Ukraine with the military buildup on the border of Ukraine is to try to accomplish that.
And how much of this is to try to accomplish testing Joe Biden? I mean, President Biden's still relatively new in terms of his administration. I know that Biden and Putin have met before, and obviously with Biden being vice president for Barack Obama, Biden has a lot of familiarity with the U.S.-Russian relationship. But how much of this do you think really is Putin just trying to sort of prod and sort of see how far he can push the Biden administration?
I think that's a big part of it as well. There's a chess match here, and he wants to try to push President Biden to concede on certain aspects of U.S. goals in Eastern Europe. He resents, Biden's support for democracies, especially democracies in Eastern Europe and among former Soviet states. So he's testing how far he can go and whether he can elicit concessions from President Biden by doing things like building up troops on the border with Eastern Ukraine and by messing with other democracies in Eastern Europe.
We mentioned, David, that you spent a lot of time, of course, advising the Obama campaign, serving as a foreign policy advisor. You've worked at the State Department. What do you make of the foreign policy team that Joe Biden has assembled?
I think they're doing a very good job. I think he has an excellent team around him. I think we're in a very tough time for foreign policy. We have pulled back a lot of our troops from places in the Middle East, but we face new threats, not just in the Middle East, but in Eastern Europe and in Asia. And there's a competition for U.S. resources and U.S. time and U.S. attention. The U.S. is rightly worried about China's goals to dominate the rest of the world and to also extend its brand of government, which is somewhat similar, not the same as Russia, but also involves a lot of corruption and involves a resentment towards democracy. So we have a competition with China, with Russia, and we have and we face a world where there are more states that are on the verge of failure. And so those are all challenges for President Biden, for his team, but I think they're doing a great job of meeting those challenges.
Is it hard to meet those challenges, though, in the midst of the domestic challenges that we face here in the United States, specifically with COVID? The Omicron variant continues to spread. It seems like that is dominating everybody's focus right now, and it feels like it's harder to get everybody's attention on challenges like Russia and China and everything else overseas.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we certainly have the capacity and the resources and the talent to focus on foreign policy while we focus on these domestic challenges. But the American people, I think right now, are not focused on foreign policy. They're looking inward, they're looking at the problems we have here, and they don't really have the time and attention to worry about what's happening abroad until there's another crisis. But unless we continue to maintain the situation abroad, there likely will be a crisis which will refocus the American people.
David Tafuri, former State Department official, former Obama campaign advisor. David, good of you to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for this conversation. On behalf of Asher Cofield, John Skip-Velaco, Gina Kim, and the rest of the gang at the Young Turks, I'm David Schuster. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.